Hey, it's Sol with another video brought to you by that. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can keep giving you more of this and all things Warcraft. Today I'm going to do another Q&A thing. Holy crap, it's only been a couple of days, but I'm going to do another Q&A recap and response to a recent interview with Ion Hazzikostas that was done by Vanion. This was done a couple of days ago, so unfortunately I'm a little bit late to the party. I apologize, but I'm going to do the usual thing. I'm going to read the questions, I'm going to give the abridged answers, as well as my response. Thankfully, the good old folks over at Wowhead, after I watched the interview and referred to the text, they did a pretty darn good job of reading through the questions, so I'm going to be relying on their work, thanks guys, to give you the questions, and then I'll just go from there. So let's get started. First question. It's no secret that the current mood of the community is not the best, and as a fan site, we've seen negative comments about almost every aspect of the game. Why do you think it's gotten so extreme since the release of Battle for Azeroth? I really like this question because it was hard-hitting, but even more than that, the response that we got from Ion, I think, was pretty heartfelt, and I think you really should, if nothing else, watch this answer, or watch and listen to the whole thing, because I think it's very much worth it. I'll have a link below. He said that the criticisms weigh heavily on he and the team, and this is something that they tackle. This is something that's taken up a lot of their time, trying to figure out what is the best response that they should give for the players. He brought up what kind of amounts to be the futility of trying to please a kind of player base that is so widespread. There's just so many different kinds of players of the world of Warcraft. People who've seen my kind of work and the things that I do, it's like, ugh, this guy's a pleb. He only does heroic raiding. What a nub. Or I would say the same thing to someone who just does pet battles. It's like, dude, you're only playing like a small fraction of the game. There's so much more out there. The biggest thing that he stressed from his answer was that he and the team cares, that they're trying to do their best to please everyone, knowing that attempting to please one party will inevitably cause some harm or cause some discomfort or anger from others, or from many others, perhaps. I really like the part where he said that if you only happen to care about one thing about the game, and he used high-end PvP as an example, that it's okay to be upset about about changes in other parts of the game that affect high-end PvP. Like, he's not telling people that you should be okay with things that affect you negatively just because it affects someone else positively, that if you're upset, just be upset and express it and give your feedback. He finished off by saying that yes, he's still proud of the work that he and the team have done on the Battle for Azeroth expansion so far, and that he's looking optimistically towards the future to continue developing improvements and fixing problems. I think that one of the challenges that Blizzard created for themselves was, funny enough, the creation of Mythic Plus, or the elevation of what I guess is a third pillar. If you think of high-end PvE as raiding, and then you think of high-end PvP, now you have this third thing. You have high-end dungeons, which is a PvE element, but now you have these three pillars of content that reward similar things. And now you're seeing this kind of friction between these three systems, whereas before it was just friction between two systems. And now this is all being complemented by all sorts of activities: islands, Warfronts, world quests, and lower end PvE, PvP content that's just giving players, it just gives so many things to do that, I don't know, maybe the system feels a little bit heavy. But let's move on to the next question. One of the bigger community complaints is with Endgame Atomization. On one hand, there needs to be catch-up mechanisms for new players and alt, but on the other hand, it feels like there are no advantages for intense day-to-day players. Why is there so much change between early expansion Atomization and today's? What's being compared are the good old days, the Burning Crusade days, and before that, up and the way things are now. Ion brought up the challenges of higher-end guilds having to go back and take their team to old content, so that way they can get new players up to snuff, they can get their attunements done, get initial gear, so then they could finally get into the real meat of the content that they want to do. These days, Ion argues, there is still a bit of friction or challenge or time that is needed in order to get XYZ player raid ready. It's not like you can just walk a noob in unless the rest of the team is severely overgeared and they can, start funneling gear to that person. But there is a legit concern, and I was talking about this just earlier, that there's so much side content, additional things to do, that it feels really easy to get caught up with whatever activity that you want to get into with your friends. There's just so many things that you can do. I want to add to the challenges that Ian brought up and talk about the opposite side of those guilds that were trying to recruit others so that they can get people attuned and whatnot. I was what you would consider a feeder guild. I was just a small 10-man, I was part of a small 10-man guild, which is the guild that I'm in right now. We're small, we aren't super skilled, but we have some pretty exceptional players. But back then, we were trying to do the same thing, but we were trying to also build up a 25-man roster. During this process, though, trying to build up people, getting people attuned for Karazhan, getting them the quests and all that stuff done, it was extremely easy, and it was the cold reality where larger guilds that were all ready to go just needed like 1 or 2 people. Hey, we just want you. You're almost attuned. We'll get you in really quick instead of you staying in that little tiny soul guild and be there for another month or 2. We can get you going like tomorrow. So of course, we would have people poached from us on a fairly regular basis. It was really, really frustrating. That sort of frustration is part of the game, I have to admit. That's, having to deal with attrition and having to feel that challenge of logistics is part of the game. And I think there's a certain enjoyment from that. I think that in those days of the Burning Crusade, that it was just a bit too much, though. Maybe you disagree with me, I get it, but it's something that Blizzard was very conscious about too, and that's why we've seen the kinds of systems and catch-ups that we've seen now. That's why we get flex, and that's why in some part we have the catch-up mechanisms that we have. But going back to Ian's answer, some of the awkwardness that came from the imbalanced catch-up mechanisms that were brought in at the start of the 8.1 patch, as opposed to the start of this Season 2 of Battle for Azeroth, part of it came from that really long 6-week gap between the patch coming out and the season. And I brought this up in one of my earlier weeklies. Thankfully, and this is a very good piece of news, Ian said that the gap between Season 3 and 8.2, the Rise of Ashara patch, that it's going to be a much smaller gap between the patch and the season beginning, or perhaps maybe the raid will open up at the same time as the patch. Either way, I think it is in a much more comfortable place if we can have a shorter gap, and that way, less awkwardness. Next question. Why aren't there more currencies and vendors for gear, similar to buying Azerite? Ian's answer was that there are, a number of currencies such as extra rule tokens, the Titan Residuum, and that sort of stuff, although the Titan Residuum is more for a certain target audience, the Mythic Plus kind of players. I think that part of the concern from wanting vendors goes back to what I had said earlier, that there are different pillars of high-end content that you can do, but you can do different things, get gear from one area, and then apply it to other places. So in order to have that balance out, that's why some of the itemization feels kind of funny. It feels pretty frustrating when you consider what you think are your best in slot secondaries come from a little bit of PvP, a little bit of dungeons, a little bit of raids. I think that it can be possible to have more currencies, although the restriction there is that the content that these currencies come from would have to be incredibly exclusive to one another. So like when it comes to PvP, that already has its own inclusive reward with the conquest system. When it comes to Titan Residuum, that's more of a it's a weird universal thing that applies all over the place, but you're only able to buy items that come from mythic dungeons. Having several different kinds of currencies can be useful, but again, that would require sort of separating the content. If you recall from way back in the day, there were there were Justice badges and Valor badges, which helped to separate 10-man gear from 25-man gear. I don't know if that's the best solution, though. I'm sure that we would get all sorts of complaints from other kinds of players who feel that, oh gosh, so I have to farm this kind of content and this kind of content and this kind of content separately to get the gear that I want. Gosh, Blizz, way to artificially prolong our subscriptions, that sort of argument. But let's move on to the next question. If you can change 2 or 3 things prior to the Battle for Azeroth release, what would they be? Ian answered this in multiple parts. He talked about Tides of Vengeance and how that is supposed to address some of the mishaps of the initial Battle for Azeroth launch. But that's what always happens. The more interesting part of the answer came from his, I guess, regrets for the Azerite system and how now in 8.2 it's going to be very, very different. It's not going to be a case where you have to obtain a certain Heart of Azeroth level in order to unlock the Azerite traits on your gear. It's just going to be automatically unlocked, and there's going to be a more interesting system, that is contained within the Heart of Azeroth, the neck piece itself. So without these exact words being said, it does appear that Ian had regretted releasing the Azerite system and the whole having to earn ranks and all that stuff to unlock pieces, and that if he had the chance to do it again, that wouldn't be a thing. Okay. This is the challenge of game design, especially in a game that is this old. It's easy for you and I to say, well, obviously they shouldn't have had the Azerite system. They should have just done the same thing that happened in Legion. But there were lessons to learn from the previous artifact power system. For some, it was, well, they should just scrap that kind of progression altogether. But Blizzard's not clairvoyant. The decisions that they make, they don't necessarily know what kind of impact is going to happen in the future. That doesn't excuse them from a damn thing, though. It's just up to them to make the necessary pivots when things aren't well received. And how they respond to those things is critical. Clearly, there are people that are very dissatisfied with the kind of response that Blizzard has had up until now, but there will always be lessons to learn. I at least appreciate that Blizzard acknowledges that. It's just the speed and the ability to pivot. That's something that I think Blizzard can definitely work on. Next question. There are a lot of new and interesting raid mechanics in the Battle of Dazar lore. What's your favorite fight in the new raid? Kind of a fluff question, but in Ian's run through the actual live game and not through playtesting, he enjoyed Opulence as well as Mechatork, and I agree, those fights are pretty darn crazy. And I looked at his armory and everything. He did in fact complete the raids once, although he didn't take out Jaina Proudmoore in heroic mode. Noob. Next question. What can you tell us about the smaller Crucible of Storms raid? Can we expect it to open with patch 8.15? And what can we expect out of the rewards since it's not a higher raid tier? I'm gonna leave this question on screen, don't worry, your YouTube thing is not broken. Ian didn't reveal much, at least not with the lore of the Crucible of Storms raid, but as for the timing, it's gonna come out shortly after, or perhaps maybe kind of sort of at the same time as the 8.15 patch launching. The item level of the stuff that you get from that raid, though, has yet to be determined, though. This is something that the team considers, I guess, flexible. It's something that they can decide, hey, this is going to be like a half-step progression from the Bodo raid, or it's going to be just the same stuff. He also pointed out that since this is only a 2-boss raid, this isn't exactly going to replace the Battle of Dazar Lord raid either. And I actually like this sort of concept where you have your initial set of bosses, but then in between, you know, even though we're not exactly going into the new tier, there's a little bit more story going on. And with that comes a small raid that doesn't exactly give, you know, super awesome upgrades that will eclipse the previous tier or the previous raid. You can instead consider this to be just an extension of this current tier or season. I wouldn't mind seeing something like this in the future where otherwise, let's say if we expect to normally see an 8-boss raid, maybe it would be a little bit cooler to see a 6-boss raid followed by a small 2-boss raid a little bit afterwards to just kind of keep things from being too monotonous. Next question. Faction assaults combined with war mode are really fun, and prior to 8.1, war mode was not really fun, at least as an alliance player. There's still issues like sharding, not being able to filter looking for group by war mode, or summon friends who are not in war mode. Any further plans to improve the system? Not really, according to Ian. I mean, he spent most of his time backing up the system and why it needed to be there in the first place, but no improvements are coming. One thing that was being talked about was the whole thing about summoning raid groups and the frustration with trying to summon someone who is in war mode, but you can't, but you need to have the same 2 people in the same kind of war mode or not war mode, but you can get someone that is or is not in war mode, whatever. The only thing that I heard from that was, hey, why don't you just put the dang summon stone inside the instance? That's it. Next question. Legion focused on class identity, order halls, legendaries, artifacts, and many players were pretty happy about it. There's little like it in Battle for Azeroth, a lack of the identity and character development. Why did you decide to change this between Legion and Battle for Azeroth? According to Ion, it's just the factions story. The Legion was about the player story, this time it's the faction story. Ta-da, that's it. It almost reads as if Blizzard is unable to walk and chew gum at the same time, which is a really poor analogy for what's going on here. The point is that there's only so much that you can cram into the work of one expansion. You can either do one or the other, you can maybe do a little bit of both, but it might be toothless. The interesting thing though is the addition of player choice in what is otherwise an expansion whose story is already written. This gives the player the opportunity to add at least a little bit of flavor, a little bit of replay value into the character or characters that they play. You could have 10 kinds of mages that are lined up all together. Among them, they might have different specializations, and among them, one of them took a side of Sylvanas, the other one took a side of Saurfang, the other one didn't care and is just kind of sipping Mai Tais. And let's just move on. From Warlords to Legion, a lot of talent trees changed from utility rows based on player preference to throughput rows with fewer utility. How has that worked out as a design decision, and is it something that you would consider revisiting? According to Ion's answer, this wasn't exactly something that they had consciously decided to do. But what they did, if you haven't noticed already, is that they took utility and they put it into its own row, while they gave throughput kinds of talents more choices altogether, so that way people can choose the kind of throughput talent that they wanted, but when it came to the utility, you just chose among different kinds of utility. This is primarily because when it comes to like raid situations, when you otherwise would try your best to not have the utility-based talents, you would just go for the throughput-based talents, and well, that would kind of sort of eliminate the semblance of choice. Part of me wonders if they should clean up a little bit more on the utility that is provided by each of the classes and specs, and make it so that there aren't necessarily talents anymore that have to do with utilities, but at the same time, this may result in certain classes having less utility than others. So for example, as a paladin, I could have a frequent single target stun, I could have a mez, or I can have a quick AoE blind. What if instead that row was entirely taken out, and a protection paladin was given the AoE blind, Ret was given the faster single target stun, and Holy was given the mez? I don't know. But let's move on to the next question. Speaking of talents, why were so many baseline abilities and passives made into talents? Because pruning is what the answer ended up being. This is the part where Ion makes the case for why they prune abilities, and they wanted the abilities to go somewhere aside from the ether, so why not put them into talents? One interesting thing that he added is that, at least right now, the team feels that they're at a point where they can in fact add new buttons, which makes me a little bit wary, because by adding new buttons, it's going to introduce the possibility that somewhere down the line, some of those buttons or other buttons or those same buttons are going to be taken away and again put into baseline ability, put into talents, or just taken away altogether. This makes me wonder again about at least an offshoot of the design idea that I had for the World of Warcraft in the long term. Instead of making more talent rows and introducing that sort of bloat, why not make the talent rows themselves just longer and providing more choices, but the same number of maximum choices that you can make. And from there, you can rebalance based on the kinds of synergies or the kinds of interesting combinations that players could think up. The next couple of questions, actually, I'm just going to read them all off right now. Can you tell us more about Mecha Gone in patch 8.2? Is it a new mega dungeon or zone, and what can we do there? Can we talk about mechanomes and allied races? And at BlizzCon, it sounded like Nazjatar will include something new every day. Can you give us some examples? In general, all that stuff is 8.2 content, and it belongs, you know, somewhere down the line. As for right now, the focus is on the launch of the launch of Season 2 and the upcoming 8.15 stuff that's on the PTR right now. So there wasn't anything new to be revealed other than the reassurance from Ion that Blizzard intends to take the best of what is to be experienced in the outdoor world. So, so the best things from the Isle of Quel'Danas, or the Timeless Isle, or the Molten Front, or Argus, haha, any of that stuff. Just take the best things from those and apply it to what's going to happen in 8.2. As for whether or not that's going to cause some sort of ridiculous clash of content that ultimately results in something that's not very desirable, I don't know, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. Next question though. Treasure chests and rares in Battle for Azeroth are boring and not really rare as they were in previous expansions. Will there be any more real rares in the future that will be more exciting? For treasure chests, the answer is yes. Ian referred to Warlords of Draenor treasures, and I don't think he was really talking about the crazy platforming in order to get some of these things, but the fact that those were very much hand-placed, and they were very item specific. Like when you looted like this horn, it was actually a horn, like it was a toy. I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool. And you got, and the context of how that item was placed there, it told a bit of a story. So there might have been a corpse next to it. There might have been certain doodads that help to explain what this item is doing there. And I thought that was really cool from a RP perspective. When it comes to rares though, at least at the moment, not so much. Thanks to certain technology like cross-realm zones and things like and sharding, things like that. The idea of farming for rares or even world bosses, it's been diluted by the ability for us to just boop, pop into a queue, get a whole bunch of people on your team, smash the rare to pieces, and like that's it. And I don't think that the best solve for that is to make raid killing mechanics from these things, or to scale them up so ridiculously that yes, that's the only way to make things feel challenging, is that you get one shot most of the time. But according to Ian, bringing back rares is something that they want to try and do anyway. As for how this is going to be reflected remains to be seen. It might be something crazy like, oh, let's do this in Nazjatar, and in Nazjatar, sharding will be restricted or very limited or something like that, in order to make these rares feel like actually rares, actual challenges that you can't just pop keys for and get a big group together, or that they're harder to farm for, and you can't just server hop until you find that special mob. Next question. Are we going to see something like the class-specific solo challenges from the Mage Tower again in the future? According to Ian, there's nothing planned. He did acknowledge that the Mage Tower was incredibly successful, although just because it's successful doesn't necessarily mean that it must be brought in every single expansion. One of the exceptions, of course, seems to be with Mythic Plus and the success that came from that. I think that having a bit of healthy solo challenges are pretty cool, whether it's the Mage Tower, whether it is Withered Training, whether it is the Deaths of Chromie scenario. And I find that interesting because there were like 3 things that were brought in for Legion. But let's not forget the Brawlers Guild. That is very much a single player experience. I mean, there are like some cool dynamics to it, but there is that. Perhaps in the future they add a special fight and the Brawlers Guild that is specific to your certain class or spec that's super hard, and you get a really awesome reward out of it. Can't we do something kind of similar to that? Next question. Heroic Warfronts were announced in BlizzCon for 8.2. Can you tell us more about the differences? Warfronts are an interesting concept, but too easy and straightforward to be fun. We don't think it's even possible to lose them. There wasn't much for Ian to reveal other than that Heroic Warfronts are going to feel, they're going to have a difficulty on par with normal raids. I find that to be at least a little bit disappointing because that's more of a cater to the lower band of PvE, although I don't think that's bad either, having a little bit more to do, and especially with friends who may not be interested in raiding but do want to have some sort of a small coordinated experience with their friends. I think that's cool. I think the problem that some players are going to have is that, oh gosh, this is more content, this is not made for me, I'm very upset about it, I want more of something else. I do still think that Warfronts has proven to be a pretty decent experiment that has helped to forward the narrative of whatever story is going on, and it fits pretty well as a piece of the Battle for Azeroth pie. In the future, though, very debatable as to whether or not a system of this scope and scale is going to exist. I think it would be cooler in a much smaller experience. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. Will there be a new Warfront in patch 8.2? And what about the Baron's Warfront speculation? Unfortunately, no, there is no Warfront plan for 8.2, and I find that a little bit disappointing. It would be cool to have more stuff to, again, forward this narrative, but apparently, not so much. I'm guessing it's because the Warfront is primarily a faction thing. 8.2 is primarily a united front thing, at least That's what it sounds like so far. And also, there's nothing planned about a Baron's Warfront. There's a lot of us that noticed data mine text from, oh shucks, a good couple of months ago that hinted that hey, there might be something going on over in Ashara or in the Barons or elsewhere. Unfortunately, that's not the case. That was just data mine stuff that was left over. It was old code that people were able to ground up. Next question. Any further plans for crafting? We've never heard a player say World of Warcraft has a good crafting system. It's kind of boring and useless without many perks or rare recipes. Hey, I think World of Warcraft has a... I'm just kidding. Ian admitted that when it comes to consumable professions, so alchemy, inscription, herbalism, whatever, that's fine. It's perfectly cool. When it comes to armor crafting professions, though, there are many different challenges that they face, and they've tried to address this with all the different kinds of iterations of crafting that we've seen over the past couple of expansions. The primary challenge is that the point of professions is to make cool items that are possibly like really strong. So there's a balance to be kept between making something that makes a profession feel overpowered versus it having like no teeth at all. Right now, it's kind of in a weird spot because you can make mythic level gear, but it's bind on pickup. You can only make it for yourself. So you can consider that to be your own profession perk, but in my opinion, not enough. Ian did say that there are huge opportunities for professions to become a lot better. And personally, I think that it needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, not so much from a, hey, let's try to make everything profitable or powerful, but more let's do professions from the ground up and revisit it from the mindset of, I'm not going to level up a paladin, I'm going to level up a blacksmith. Maybe that should be a thing. And the final question. Zone design in Kul Tiras and Zandalar is beautiful, but traveling back to the old zones feels like a completely different game. Arathi and Darkshore overhauls were nice. Can we get more? The answer was yes, as long as there's a reason to go back there. When it came to the Arathi and Darkshore revamp, it's because there was a whole freaking Warfront that was put on top of it, along with a quest line and other such things. I'm speaking for myself here, but I certainly wouldn't want a Cataclysm level of revamp where entire zones were redone, but there was no reason to go there unless I were to make a brand new character. What if I don't give a damn about making a brand new character? I guess I'm not going to see that content. And for the record, I still haven't seen more than 1 or 2 zones of the Cataclysm content. It's old and yet it's not old. But I haven't played through that stuff because by the time Cataclysm came out, I already had enough characters that leveled past that kind of content, and I didn't really have any interest to go back and level up a new character just because. I mean, we'll see what happens when Zandalari trolls become a thing, but is that really enough? Is revamping a zone a good idea just for the sake of revamping the zone? In my opinion, no. But let's pretend that in 8.3 of Battle for Azeroth, there is a significant amount of content that takes place in Winter Spring. Okay, cool. I guess we're going to Winter Spring. So in that sense, I would definitely accept a bigger revamp or even a full revamp of the zone for the sake of suiting all the new content that's going to appear in Winter Spring. It's a terrible example. And that about wraps it up. Shucks, I always mean to make these recaps and responses like half as long as the actual thing. But yeah, this is almost as long as the actual Q&A. So again, sorry that this took so long. Thanks for putting up with it though. I thought that this was a great compliment to Thursday's Q&A. I think that overall, it's a good thing that Ian is putting himself up to multiple firing squads over a much shorter span of time. It may not be something that satisfies people when it comes to the answers or the intents, but at least we get this. This may not satisfy you, but it's okay, and so I always encourage you to share your thoughts in a comment below. And of course, like and subscribe to help support the channel so I can keep giving you more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.